Fathers and machines. The problem of paternity in the modern world. The problem of identity in the modern world. The problem of nature and reason in the modern world. Someone once said, "Don't trust your father. He's just jealous." Someone in the Garden of Eden. Who is that someone? And what alternative is given by this someone to paternal authority? What does paternal authority signify? Today, we hear so much about people identifying themselves, defining their identity. This is freedom. Freedom is to identify myself as I please. I am in charge of my own identity. I decide what I am. I'm a self-made man, perhaps, or perhaps the collectivity, the society is making me. But somehow I have to be in charge. I will decide. I will define myself. I will say what I am. I'm in charge of saying it. Am I a man or a woman? Am I a good man or a bad man? Who am I to say? Who are you to say? Who is anyone to say? I can say, in a certain respect, in the respect that I am supported by the machine, in the respect that I listen to the machine, in the respect that I am well integrated in a mechanical society dominated by machines, that functions mechanically, that promotes a mechanical consciousness, a consciousness that is governed by the view that all movement, all motion occurs mechanically. Many a moon ago, Zeno, Parmenides' student, almost mythical student, gave us this image of an arrow that is cast to reach a target. And this arrow moves from point A to point B. And of course, point A and point B presuppose a point C between the two. Reason being that if there were no point C, A and B would collapse into each other. So they need to be distanced, differentiated by some other point. Now, if that is the case, if between point A and point B there's always a point C, then between point A and point C there's always going to be a point D, and so forth ad infinitum. Which is to say that the arrow will never reach the target, because there will always be a point between point of departure and the point of arrival, no matter how small. And it goes on infinitely. So Zeno's point, presumably, is that if we want to understand motion, movement, change, it would be wrong to conceive it mechanically. Point A moving toward point B. Wrong. Modernity, of course, teaches that that is the case, that there is a movement, mechanical movement from point A to point B, and so modernity is dealing with the complexity of this movement by detecting middle links, right, the missing links. So with technology, we go into the small nitty-gritty interstices, and we find the missing links. And then we try to reconstruct movement based on this mechanistic conception of reality. And machines help us achieve greater and greater sophistication in this. So we have the doctrine of evolution, for instance. And so all works through the machine. Say, well, it is the machine that defines what we are. Say, well, there's no freedom. Well, yes, because the machine somehow evolves into some kind of consciousness, which is a superstructure for the underpinning mechanical dynamics. So in our society, we reflect the mechanisms that are underpinning our consciousness. So when we defend this consciousness on the surface, our decisions, our will, we're really doing the bidding of the undercurrent mechanisms. All right. So we have a machine that defines what is right and wrong, good and evil. A machine that defines what we are. And what about the Father? Your Father is wrong. Your Father must be defied. Don't listen to your Father. He's just jealous. What does that mean? It means that the voice of your Father, being the reflection of a voice in nature, nature not mechanically construed, but nature as the cradle of the inherence, the even eternity of consciousness in what appears in movement. That inherence is rejected by the snake. How so? The snake says, don't listen to your father. He is jealous. For he does not want you to attain to his authority. Why would the snake say such a thing? Why would a snake reject and invite us to reject the voice of the Father? Paternal authority. Paternal authority signals human freedom, the freedom of the Son. How so? The Son inherits something from the Father. He inherits freedom. He partakes in the Father through freedom. What is this freedom, however? It is freedom seated at the heart of the Father. The snake is the logic of the machine. The logic of the machine that tells Adam and Eve, or Adam through Eve, don't listen to your father. He's jealous. He does not want you to be like the Father, to replace the Father, that divine necessity of the Father. The snake, the mechanical logic, tells Adam and Eve, you must seek freedom outside of divine necessity, by abstracting it outside of divine necessity. autonomous freedom, that then can pit itself against divine necessity. You can be like divine necessity. Human freedom can be raised to the status, to the level of divine necessity. It can displace divine necessity. So you can have a new divine necessity. But how? Thanks to the machine, thanks to the mechanical logic, the logic of the machine. The logic of the machine is to replace the paternal authority. This is the fundamental message of the Bible that then is rearticulated throughout in various ways. But fundamentally, this is the heart, the kernel of the Bible. Satanic logic of the machine, as opposed to divine necessity. So where is human freedom here? Does human freedom take its bearing from the satanic logic of the machine, or from divine necessity? Divine necessity is paternal authority. In the modern world, we must replace paternal authority with the logic of the machine. This is happening more and more ostensively, more and more glaringly today, where we have exteriorized this machine in terms of our computers, our toys, our games, and so forth, our sophisticated system of entertainment and of control, of course. For indeed, the logic of the machine has us pay a price. Right? What is the price that we must pay? Well, freedom now is within the machine, which serves as de facto a cage, a cell, that being mechanically structured, mechanically constituted, has no reason why. It is a kind of Big Bang. It is a factum brutum. It is a given beyond question. It is an answer, an empty answer, to be sure, that wants us to fill it. It is a cell that wants us to abide in it. So we have this now responsibility to give meaning within that cell. It is a moral imperative for us to identify ourselves, to produce meaning within the strictures of the machine. Without our involvement, our defining things, our producing meaning within the strictures of the machine would be pointless. The machine is there to give us a space within which to be free. If we question that space, we can no longer be free, says the machine, the logic of the machine. So anyone who is referring to paternal authority must be wrong, bad. That paternal authority has to be superseded by the logic of the machine, outside of which you can no longer be free. It is very dangerous. It is potentially a threat to humanity to refer back to paternal authority. The father must be displaced, rejected, overcome, entirely, ultimately. Anybody who has children is faced with this problem. The child will listen to the robot, to the machine, to the computer, and if the father says something that is somehow not compatible with, or even not aligned with what the machine is saying, the father must be wrong, because the machine, the system, must be right. Salvation is in the machine. Today, we're better off because we have better machines, more efficient machines. In other words, machines that secure a space within which we can be free. Well, it restricts, obviously, the scope of our freedom, narrows it down, flattens it out. But this allows us to say that we are more free today than before. The child goes to the computer game that tells him you can do whatever you want here. You can create your own world. You can be in effect, a kind of God. Of course, it's virtual. And all of this dream, this illusion, this delusion is coming complements of the machine, of the logic of the machine. And the logic of the machine requires customers to feed into it so we can play within the machine. We are the subjective element, and the machine provides the objective context. The Father must be thrown out of the picture, because the Father represents the inherence of the subjective in the objective, to speak in modern terms, in other words, of consciousness in the unconscious. Otherwise put, content is present in the form itself, prior to appearing outside of it. So the paternal authority is signaling for Adam and Eve their presence, their inherence in divine necessity itself. Freedom is originally seated at the heart of divine necessity. It is not to reject divine necessity for the logic of the machine that imposes itself as value-free, as meaningless, as beyond question, and as guaranteeing for us a place, a sphere, a space within which we can be free. How are we to be free? Autonomously. Creating our own identity, defining ourselves. Not free in a classical sense. You see, if freedom is bound to divine necessity, if it is seated at the heart of it, then it can be turned toward the good. Then divine necessity is originally good, compatible with our freedom. We want it, we desire it by nature because that's our original home. And so, this freedom of ours is at once a virtue. It is something good. It is a strength of ours. We're strengthened by that cradle of ours. In the case of the machine comes somehow first. And it's defining a place in which we can be free without questioning the machine. In the case of paternal authority, we can question our God, we can wrestle with the angel, we can ask our Father what he means. We're in dialogue with the Father. But in the modern context, you don't ask your Father what he means if you don't understand. You tell him, no, you're wrong because the machine says otherwise. Who are you to disagree with the machine? Well, who is the Father? He's the voice of reason in nature. He represents this original bond between reason and freedom and nature. The Father has a natural bond with the Son. The machine does not, of course, even though now they're trying to, the adepts of the system are trying to declare, to establish, to have everyone believe that the machine can generate life. And so the Father is a threat to the system. A threat because he reminds us that prior to being within the machine, we are within divine necessity. And divine necessity, in biblical terms, being the Father in heaven, is mirrored and the Father on earth. And it is through the Father on earth that we begin discerning the Father in heaven. You get rid of the Father on earth, you replace it with the Father as a machine, the machine Father, the new surrogate Father. What transcendence do you get? A virtual one, of course. You get to create your own gods. Not to discern, not to divine, not to recognize, but to produce your own gods. And of course, complements of the machine, of the logic of the machine. So, inevitably, in the context of a mechanical logic of modernity, inevitably the Father must be eliminated. And so we are to define ourselves, we are to define our gender, we are to define our identity in mechanical terms, as long as we define it in accordance with the logic of the machine. Right? And now, at this stage, this is the dividing line. Those who jump into the machine, crowds that jump into the machine. Of course, they reject both God and man, man being the soul, the rational soul. They reject that. And they end up with this, this very gay or sodomite type, Gomorrhean type of freedom, which ultimately is nothing more than madness. And then you have those who question the machine, the logic of the machine, and those are going to be very few. Some are on the border, and they still appeal to God, but they accept the logic of the machine nonetheless. They appeal to God as consolation, as an ideal, a value that we can still cherish even though we follow the logic of the machine. And of course, this value, this God that they cherish, is going to be more and more nothing more than a dream within the machine. So this image, this avatar, right, that we dream of, this mirage that we still dream of within this sphere of this place of freedom defined by the logic of the machine. So that's absolutely inadequate as a response to the logic of modernity. The only adequate response, objection, solid, concrete objection to that logic, is going to require an investigation. So a reason that entails this indissoluble bond between the Son and the Father, between freedom and divine necessity. So it is this logos, this discourse, this reasoning that will free us from the tentacles of the machine. And that will, of course, mean that we will no longer understand our lives in mechanical terms, our identities mechanistically, the reason of things, causality in mechanistic terms. So we will certainly not adhere to the doctrine of evolution, mechanistic doctrine by definition. And so we will trust primordial logos without fear of repercussions. Of course, since we're still weak-minded, in a very unstable situation, we will try to be as cautious as possible and not overexpose ourselves to too many dangers. But the machine is rather insensitive to original reason. In fact, it somehow picks up but the echoes of it and distorts it in its own way. So we need not be and should not be very concerned about repercussions, for our, well, our uncompliance with the logic of the machine.